The night Caleb walked into that restaurant and saw a woman sitting alone in front of a cake with no one to light the candles, he learned something he should have known by 41. The cruelest thing people do to each other is rarely loud. It's a chair left empty on purpose. It's a phone that doesn't ring. It's a whole family deciding, without ever saying it, that someone's celebration isn't worth being late from work for. Caleb was 41, and he made his living drawing buildings before they existed. Architectural drafting, restoration, work mostly, old houses that good people wanted brought back to themselves instead of torn down. He liked the work because it was patient and honest, lines that had to be true, or the whole thing fell down. And because it let him be exactly as quiet as he was. He'd been married once to a woman named Megan, and it had ended 4 years ago the way some marriages end. Not in a fire, but in a slow drift. Two people waking up one day on opposite shores of a thing that had once been one room. There were no children, no war, just a quiet division and a quiet goodbye. Megan had remarried within the year. Caleb had not remarried at all. He wasn't bitter about it. He'd simply gone still, the way a pond goes still when nothing's been thrown in for a long time. The one part of that marriage he genuinely missed was Ruth, Megan's mother. Ruth was 53 now, widowed 5 years, a small, straight-backed woman with a dry tongue and kind eyes who had always treated Caleb less like a son-in-law and more like a person she'd chosen to like on purpose. In the years he and Megan were together, it was Ruth he ended up talking to at every holiday, the two of them at the end of the kitchen counter making quiet fun of the napkin folding. And when the marriage ended, he'd assumed, the way you do, that he'd lost her in the settlement along with the good knives. They hadn't spoken in 4 years. So it was nobody's plan that put him in that restaurant. He was meeting a client who canceled by text the moment he sat down, and he was about to leave when he saw her across the room. Ruth, at a table set for 8, sitting alone in front of a small white cake with the number on it unlit, her hands folded in her lap, her good blue dress on, her chin up in the particular way of a person determined not to let anyone see them shrink. 2 waiters were pointedly not refilling the 7 empty water glasses. She kept glancing at the door and then making herself stop. Caleb stood by the host stand and did the math no one wants to do. He counted the empty chairs. He saw the cake with nobody to light it. He felt something move in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time, slow and clean, like a line snapping true. And then he crossed the room, and he pulled out the chair across from her, and he sat down in it before he'd quite decided to. Ruth looked up, startled, and her face went through 3 things fast: alarm, recognition, and then a brightness so sudden and so quickly hidden that it nearly undid him. "Caleb," she said, "what on earth?" "Client canceled," he said, easy as anything, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world to take an empty seat at a stranger's table, as if there were nothing to explain. And it would be a crime to let a cake that nice go unsupervised. He picked up the dessert menu like he meant to stay. "Happy birthday, Ruth." For a second he thought she might cry, and he was grateful when she didn't, because he understood that her not crying was the whole of her dignity and he wasn't going to be the thing that took it. Instead, she folded her hands tighter and said, with the dry steadiness he remembered, "They're coming." They got held up. Megan had a thing, and Vincent's always late, and the grandkids, she stopped. She'd never been a good liar. "It's fine. It happens." "It shouldn't," Caleb said, gently, and let it go, because you don't make a person say out loud the thing that's hurting them while it's still hurting. You just sit in the empty chair so it isn't empty anymore. They ate. He ordered properly, 2 courses, and made her order more than the salad she'd been nursing, and somewhere around the 2nd glass of wine the 4 years fell away the way they do between people who genuinely liked each other. She told him about the bird feeder war she was waging with a particularly arrogant squirrel. She made fun of the restaurant's menu, which described the bread as artisan forward, and asked what bread that was moving backward looked like. He told her about a house he was restoring across town, a 1920s craftsman with bones worth saving, and she listened the way almost no one listened to him anymore, like the details were the good part. The cake sat between them, and at some point he asked the waiter for a candle and a match. Just one, and he lit it, and he didn't sing, because Ruth would rather have eaten the candle than be sung to, but he slid it across to her and said, "Make it a good one." And she closed her eyes and made a wish with the seriousness of a woman who had stopped expecting them to come true and had decided to wish anyway. That was when the family arrived. All 7 of them, loud and unbothered, 40 minutes after the candle, the grandkids whining and Megan already on her phone, and, leading the pack, Vincent, Ruth's son. A big polished man who ran a car dealership and talked the way men talk when they've never been told to stop. He took in the scene at a glance, his mother, the cake, the man in the chair, and his face arranged itself into the grin of someone about to be funny at another person's expense. "Well, look at this," Vincent said, loud enough for the next table. "Mom found herself a date. Should we be worried, Ma? You upgrading?" He looked at Caleb and the grin widened. "Hey, it's the ex-husband, the drafting guy. Megan, your ex is hitting on Mom." He laughed at his own joke and a couple of the others laughed because that's what you do at Vincent's jokes, and Ruth's face went carefully, terribly blank, the blankness of a woman who has heard herself made the punchline at her own table for years and learned to absorb it without showing the bruise. Caleb didn't laugh. He set down his fork. He looked at Vincent for a moment, unhurried the way you look at a measurement you already know is wrong, and then he said, evenly, not loud, "We've been here an hour. You'll have to catch us up on the joke, because from where I'm sitting the only funny thing tonight is 7 people 40 minutes late to their mother's birthday acting like the empty chairs were hers." The table went quiet. Vincent's grin held for a second too long and then started to come apart at the corners. "Easy," Vincent said. "It's a joke." "I know," Caleb said. "That's the problem. You decided a while ago that she was the kind of person you could be late for and joke about, and everybody here just goes along with it because you're loud and you're paying for the cars." He stood, unhurried, and put his napkin on the table. "I took the chair because it was empty. You all left it that way. Don't aim the joke at the only person who showed up on time." He turned to Ruth. The family was silent in the particular way of people who have just watched a thing they didn't know they needed watched. "It was a good birthday," Caleb told her, quietly, just to her. "Thank you for letting me crash it. The candle was the best part of my week." And he left the restaurant before anyone could make it a scene, because he hadn't done it for a scene, and he drove home in the dark not knowing whether he'd done a kind thing or a foolish one. She called him 3 days later. He didn't recognize the number. "It's Ruth," the voice said, dry and a little nervous. "I got your number from Megan, who gave it to me with a great deal of editorial commentary. I'm calling to thank you and to tell you that I have not stopped thinking about the look on Vincent's face and that it has improved my mood for 3 straight days." A pause. "Also, my downspout is hanging off the house and I don't know who else to call who won't talk to me like I'm 1,000 years old." So he came and fixed the downspout. Megan called him about it, of course, within the week. Word travels in families, and Megan had her mother's number into his life and a great deal to say about how he was using it. She wasn't cruel, she'd never been cruel, just careless in the way of people who've decided how a story goes and stopped reading it. "It's a little weird, Caleb," she said. "You and my mom. People are going to think it's weird." She paused. "I'm not saying don't help her, I'm saying don't make it a thing. It's a downspout, Megan," Caleb said. "Nobody made it a thing except the people who left her sitting alone at her own birthday." He said it without heat, the way you state a measurement. "You want me to stop coming? Your mother can tell me herself. She's the only one at that table who gets a vote on her own porch." There was a long silence on the line, and then Megan said, quieter, "She seems happy. That's all." It's been a while since she seemed happy, and hung up before either of them had to decide what that meant, and Caleb stood in Ruth's yard with his tools and understood that the family had just registered, however grudgingly. That the empty chair had been filled by someone who intended to keep sitting in it. And then there was a sticking window, and a porch board, and a kitchen faucet, and somewhere in there the repairs stopped being the reason and became the excuse, the way they do. He'd come on a Saturday and fix one thing and stay for 3 hours of coffee at her kitchen table, the one with the good morning light. And they'd talk the way they used to at the end of the counter at those old holidays, except now there was no marriage in the room to give it shape, and the talk went deeper for having nothing to hide behind. She told him about the marriage she'd had, the long quiet one to a good man who'd died too young, and how the worst part of widowhood wasn't the grief. It was the way her children began to treat her as a problem to be scheduled around. "I went from being the woman who held the whole family together," Ruth said one rainy afternoon, turning her coffee mug in her hands, to being a line item on everyone's calendar. "Vincent manages me. Megan apologizes to me. Nobody just sits with me. You're the first person in 5 years who pulled out a chair instead of checking their watch." Caleb didn't reach across the table, though something in him wanted to. "You're not a line item," he said. "You're the best conversation in this town, and the whole town's too busy to notice." She looked at him a long moment over the rim of her mug, and the rain ran down the window. And she didn't say anything, but something passed between them that didn't need saying yet. What he'd never told her, what he turned over on the drive home most Saturdays, was that the hardest part of being the person nobody shows up for isn't the empty chair itself. It's that after a while, you start setting the table for fewer people on purpose. So no one will ever know how many you'd have hoped for. He'd done it himself after Megan. He recognized it in Ruth the way you recognize your own handwriting on a wall, and somewhere between the downspout and the faucet he'd decided he was tired of them both pretending a too small table was a preference instead of a wound. There was a Saturday in early summer when the repair was only a loose cabinet pull, a 10-minute job, and they both knew it, and neither of them mentioned that it was a 10-minute job, and he stayed 5 hours instead. Ruth made iced tea, and they sat on the back porch in the long gold light of a summer evening, watching the squirrel conduct its campaign against the feeder. And she got out an old shoebox of photographs because he'd asked, genuinely, what she'd been like before she was anybody's grandmother. She showed him a picture of herself at 26 in a yellow dress, laughing at something outside the frame, and Caleb looked at it for a long time. "There she is," he said, "the one who makes fun of the bread. She's been in there the whole time." Ruth took the photo back and looked at it, and something moved in her face. "Nobody's asked to see her in 20 years, she said. "They look at me, and they see a schedule. You looked at a woman alone with a cake and saw a person worth sitting down for. Do you know how long it's been since anyone did that?" "Their loss," Caleb said. "I've got the chair." She laughed, but it came out unsteady, and she set the shoebox down and looked at the yard instead of at him. A cardinal landed on the fence. The ice ticked in the glasses. "I keep waiting for you to figure out I'm too old and too taken for granted to be worth the trouble," she said. "I keep waiting for the Saturday you don't come." "I'm not building toward a Saturday I don't come," Caleb said. "I'm building toward the one where I stop pretending it's about the cabinet pull." He hadn't meant to say it that plainly. It came out the way true things do, before politeness catches them. Ruth went very still, and the summer light lay across the porch, and the moment stretched out long and charged and unclosed, and then she stood and gathered the glasses with hands that weren't quite steady and said, "Well, the pull is fixed. You'd better come back next Saturday and find something else," and went inside, and Caleb sat on the porch a while longer with the open loop of it humming in his chest, knowing that the next time one of them was going to have to stop pretending. She came to see the house he was restoring finally on a Tuesday. Because he'd talked about it so much, she said she had to know if it was as good as he made it sound. He showed her through the 1920s Craftsman, the rooms full of dust motes and lumber, and the smell of old fur and fresh sawdust, the original windows he was saving, and the staircase he was bringing back from under decades of bad carpet. Ruth walked through it slowly, touching things, and stood for a long while in the front room where the afternoon light came in through the wavy old glass and fell across the floor in long warm panels. "You saved the old ones," she said. "Everybody else would tear this down and put up something with no soul in it, and you stand here and save it." She turned to look at him. "Do you know how that feels to a woman my age, to watch a man whose whole job is deciding that old things are worth keeping?" Caleb stood in the dust and the light and didn't pretend he didn't understand her. "I don't keep the old ones because they're old," he said. "I keep them because somebody built them right the first time and the world got too busy to notice. That's not charity. That's just paying attention." He held her eyes. "You're not a house I'm being kind to, Ruth. You're the best built thing I've seen in years, and nobody's been looking." The light lay across the floor between them. Somewhere a board settled. Ruth pressed her lips together and looked out the wavy glass at the street and said, in a voice gone unsteady, You can't say things like that to a woman in an empty house and then go back to your downspouts, and he said, I know, and neither of them moved, and the open loop of it hung in the dusty light all the way home. Vincent, of course, made it his business. He showed up at Ruth's one Saturday while Caleb was on a ladder, and he stood at the bottom of it in his good shoes and his car salesman's certainty and explained reasonably man to man that this looked bad, that people were talking, that his mother was vulnerable and confused, and that a man Caleb's age circling a lonely widow was, frankly, a little sad. She's not thinking straight since Dad, Vincent said. She's lonely. You're taking advantage. Be a decent guy and find someone your own situation. Caleb came down off the ladder slowly. He looked at Vincent and then past him to the kitchen window where Ruth was watching and then back. He didn't raise his voice. She's the sharpest person I know, he said. The only one confused at this table is the man who thinks his own mother can't tell when somebody's glad to see her. He let that sit. You want to protect her? Here's how. Show up on time, light the candle, sit in the chair before some stranger has to. Then, quieter, the catharsis of it clean and cold, don't decide she's lonely just because you're the reason she was. Vincent had no answer. He had the look of a man who'd come to win a small war and discovered the ground had been wrong under his feet the whole time. He got in his car and left, and the window stayed unfixed for the moment because Ruth came out onto the porch instead, in her cardigan, with her arms crossed, having heard all of it. You didn't have to, she said. I know. I could have handled him. And she could have. She lifted her chin to prove it. I've been handling him for 5 years. I know that too, Caleb said. I wasn't handling him for you. I was just telling the truth where he could hear it. The handling's yours. He came up onto the porch and stood beside her, not in front of her, both of them looking out at the yard and the offending squirrel on the offending feeder. Ruth was quiet for a while. Then she said in a different voice, a careful one, the voice of a woman deciding to stop waiting, Caleb, I'm 53. I have buried a husband and raised children who schedule me, and I have spent every Saturday for 2 months pretending my house breaks more than it does. She turned to face him. I'm not going to do the thing where I wait to see if you'll say it. I'm too old to lose months to politeness, so I'll say it. I would like you to come on Saturdays because it's Saturday, not because of the faucet. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I understand you perfectly, Caleb said. I understood you at the restaurant. I've understood you for 2 months. Then for heaven's sake, Ruth said, and her dry voice finally went soft at the edges. What are you waiting for? I lit a candle and wished for exactly this, and I'm not in the business of wasting wishes. And she was the one who reached, her small hand coming up to the front of his shirt, and she kissed him there on the porch with the rain just starting and the squirrel scolding from the feeder and 5 years of being treated like a problem falling off her shoulders all at once. He didn't move first. He'd taken an empty chair and stayed in it and been decent and present, and she had chosen him out loud and with her own hand, and when she leaned back her eyes were bright and steady. For the record, Ruth said, you were always my favorite, even when you were Megan's. For the record, Caleb said, the candle was still the best part of my week. This is a close second, and the rain ran soft down the porch glass, and the squirrel watched from the feeder like a witness, and for the first time in 5 years the empty chair at Ruth's table had a name in it that intended to stay. There was a complication, because there's always a complication, and it came at a family dinner a month later, the whole clan around Ruth's table, Vincent stiff, Megan watchful. The grandkids oblivious. Vincent tried, near the end, to reopen it, to make a reasonable speech about appearances and what their father would have thought, and Ruth set down her fork and looked at her son with 5 years of patience finally spent. Your father, she said, calm as deep water, would have shaken Caleb's hand for sitting down when you couldn't be bothered to show up. I loved your father and I miss him every day, and I am not going to spend the rest of my life as the empty chair you're all so comfortable leaving. I have decided to be happy, Vincent, and you are invited to be happy for me, but you are not invited to vote on it. She picked her fork back up. Now eat. The artisan-forward bread is getting cold, whatever that means. The table sat in stunned quiet, and then Megan, of all people, laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and said, Mom, in a tone that was half apology and half admiration, and the worst of it broke right there. Caleb didn't rescue her. He just sat beside her, the way he had on the latter day, the way he had at the restaurant, while she planted her flag in her own ground. Vincent came around slowly over the following year, the way the stubborn ones do, and one day he even called Caleb to ask his opinion on a deck he was building, which everyone understood was an apology with a hammer in its hand. The years after came in the small, warm pictures. There was the morning Caleb redrew Ruth's kitchen on his big drafting paper, opening it up to the light she loved, and built the new window seat himself so she could drink her coffee where the sun came in and watch her war with the squirrel. There was the bird feeder he engineered to finally defeat the squirrel, which the squirrel defeated anyway within a week, to Ruth's enormous delight. There was the long, slow healing with Megan, two people who'd once shared a marriage learning to share a mother instead, and doing it with more grace than either expected. There was the first birthday after, the one that made up for the empty chairs, when Caleb arranged for the whole family to arrive a full hour before Ruth at the same restaurant, so that for once she walked into a table that was already full, already loud, already waiting on her, the candles lit before she even sat down. And she stood in the doorway in her good blue dress and pressed her lips together hard and didn't cry, and Caleb pulled out her chair. There was the framed photograph that went up over the new window seat, the one of a laughing woman in a yellow dress at 26, because Caleb had had it restored and framed and hung it where the morning light would find it. And Ruth pretended to scold him for it and looked at it every single day. And there was the evening she told him, quietly over coffee at the table with the good light, that she'd stopped feeling like a line item somewhere around the third Saturday, and that she hadn't realized how long she'd been holding her breath until someone finally just sat down across from her and stayed. And there was the evening, 2 years on, when Caleb set a small white cake on that sunlit kitchen table with a single unlit candle in it and slid a small box up next to it, and Ruth looked at the cake and the candle and the box and understood the way she'd understood him from the start. "You and your candles," she said, her voice not quite steady. "Make it a good one," Caleb said. "Then say yes out loud. I want to hear you decide. You decide better than anyone I know." So she lit the candle herself, and closed her eyes and made the wish, and then she opened them and said yes in her own dry, steady voice gone soft, with the rain just starting on the window the way it always seemed to when something true was happening in this story. And Caleb thought about all the empty chairs in the world, and how the whole of a life can turn on a man deciding to sit down in one before he's even sure why. What would you have done if you'd walked into that restaurant and seen someone you used to love's mother sitting alone in front of a birthday cake nobody came to light? Would you have taken the empty seat, or told yourself it wasn't your place and walked out the door? And have you ever been the empty chair at your own table, the person everyone got too busy to show up for? Or have you been the one who finally decided, like Ruth, that you were done waiting to be chosen and were going to be happy whether or not anybody voted for it? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.